Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, a podcast about podcasts where each week we listen to a brand new show. And at the end of the week, we're going to recommend a new show. And we're going to talk about that and everything it made us feel. I am Zach, and I am once again joined by my buddy, Matt.
Hey.
And this week we are talking about Matt's recommendation from last week called the Bechdel Cast. And this specific episode is about Gigli.
Yes. So the Bechdel Test is a podcast hosted by Caitlin Durante and Jamie Loftus. And they take something called the Bechdel Test that was, I should have looked up the history of it, but it was invented by a cartoonist, actually. We can go into that a little bit more later on. But they take this test and they apply it to popular movies with a guest. And they approach all these movies from a intersectional feminist perspective. And I will say the episode that we're doing today, Gigli, the guest that they have on is Josh Fadem, a very funny stand-up comedian, actor, just a really funny guy. And it's not exactly indicative of the intersectional feminist approach of everything. I really love the episode. I love Josh Fadem. Obviously, I love Jamie Loftus and Caitlin Durante, but them with Josh Fadem is like comedy gold. And it's only their 16th episode, and they are up to probably like 400 now. They're partnered with iHeartRadio, so you can find it anywhere. And I just love this episode so much.
I'm going to say this episode took me on a journey because not only did I listen to the episode, I did go and watch Gigli. So there's a lot of stuff happening. But yeah, like he said, and I actually looked this up while we were talking about it, the Bechdel test first appeared in 1985, and Alison Bechdel, who was a cartoonist at the time, she had a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For. And in this, she established the rules for the Bechdel test. And they are, the movie has to have at least two women in it, who talk to each other about something other than a man. So that's three rules that you would be shocked at the amount of movies that fail the Bechdel test.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I think there's one usually added, or did you read that? So it's good Lord, it's they have to be named characters.
Oh, named was
well.
not in this.
Yeah,
so that
one's
added.
added afterwards, but pretty reasonably.
Yeah. So yeah, several variants have been proposed. For example, that the two women must be named characters, or there must be at least a total of 60 seconds of conversation. So there.
That one's probably no movies past that
yeah,
test.
Nobody is.
So they're like, well, hold on a minute.
Let's not get crazy.
Let's not get crazy. Yeah.
We need some of these movies to pass.
Yeah, so crazy. It's so crazy. It's fun to listen to because each episode is usually a very well-known movie that usually doesn't do very well.
And the funny thing is, I'm trying to think, this one, by the skin of its teeth, maybe passed. Because there was a conversation between two women multiple times, but it was borderline both times on passing.
Yes, and I will say when they review these movies, they even if they pass and they're terrible on all fronts, like Love Actually was one of them that's really great, a great episode that they do. But I think Love Actually just barely scrapes by, but it's one of like the worst feminist. They talk about it. There's this great scene with Colin Firth, and like the whole thing is he can't understand and she can't understand him because she's only speaks Spanish and he only speaks English. And somehow like they fall in love, even though they can't speak to one another. And it's like, okay, that's not a good feminist approach to a relationship. So they really talk about representation on top of it. So though it passed, Gigli might be the worst film ever made in terms of offensiveness.
And see, this is the thing that was my entry to this, because I feel like everybody's heard of Gigli because it was universally panned. This was not something where, they're being too harsh. This movie came out and people started laughing at it, and it has since continued. They have like a 2.5 on IMDb. They have like a 7% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. They have gotten roasted constantly. And so when you picked this one, I was like, okay, I got to watch this movie. And I found out that I could get a free trial to Stars so I could just watch it for free on Amazon. So
Stars is the one that ended up with this.
Stars is the one who owns these rights. So great move, Stars. You got me. No, not really. I'm going to just try and cancel that before I get charged again. So yeah, yesterday I sat down and I watched Gigli. And
I'm sorry your Friday was ruined.
I've watched a lot of bad movies because I just like movies. You know, I know to me, there's a certain level of bad movie that then becomes good. But this is not one of these movies. I was mostly confused the whole time.
And it's not even like a confusion of like, what is happening? It's like, why?
Yeah, it's
why is this happening?
Yeah, so for anybody who is curious, and they talk about this in the Bechdel Cast as well, so you can definitely check out their conversation because hilarious the whole time.
Oh
really an absolute pleasure to listen to them talk about this movie. But that's part of why anytime it's a movie podcast, I like to watch the movie. So I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So the premise generally is, and they talk about this a little bit in the podcast, is like two crimey people. Well, a crimey guy. He's like, just like,
I love how you and Kirk always say crimey instead of like criminals. I love that. Yeah. Just keep going. Crimey. I love it.
I'm just saying I don't know that he's a criminal particularly. He's just crimey generally.
He's a little crimey.
It doesn't make sense to me particularly, but he's not a great guy, I guess. And they say, hey, you need to go get this guy. We later find out that he is developmentally disabled.
Oh my God. And
problem number one arises.
Yes. Whether or not they got a developmentally challenged person to play that role. And the answer is no.
It's no. It's the guy.
No, of course.
It's the guy who got stuck on the roof in The Hangover.
Yes.
He's not even one of the leads in The Hangover.
I can't remember his name. They mentioned his name a bunch in the episode.
Yeah, I can't remember it either. So there's problem one is you have to kidnap this guy.
By the way, the guy that's kidnapping, his name is Gigli.
Larry Gigli.
Yes. And he constantly at this point, we've probably heard 100 times, Gigli, like really.
Yeah. And I mean,
there's 100 different
The writing
words
on this movie messed with me the whole time because he wrote this like, okay, we're going to make a funny joke where people call him Jiggly the whole time. And it's going to be funny. He's like, it's not Jiggly, it's Gigli.
Like really.
And he says it multiple times. You're like, okay, he's just not necessary. But so that's the premise. Ben Affleck in like peak rom-com Ben Affleck takes somebody that he probably shouldn't be taking. That should be, the whole character is messed up. And he just takes him back to his house. They have this little like kind of, I don't know, they're mad at each other in the beginning.
For ransom, right? Yeah.
They're trying to leverage a, what do you call it?
Kingpin
a
or
prosecutor.
Something?
No, like a prosecutor for the
right.
state.
Yes.
And it's his brother. And that's the premise is you get him to do that. But then here comes J-Lo, who is also crimey, but with nothing really. Just kind of, she's here too.
She just walks in, right?
Yeah, no, and that's
that's
when I first knew the movie was off the rails because anybody that shows up to Ben Affleck's door while he's harboring someone he has kidnapped, he just lets them in. He's like, go ahead and come on in. Like, it's fine. And I mean, I think it's really just like the women show up and he's like, hey,
oh yeah,
how's it going?
I'm almost positive there's that like stereotypical shot of J-Lo starting at the feet going up to her head.
No, they talk about in the podcast. It goes the opposite way. He looks through the peephole and it's the back of her head. Like she like knocked on the door and turned around so you could just see the back of her head. And he's like, oh, I mean, the back of your head. So far, I'm interested. But basically, it's just this whole story of just trying to keep this guy. But there's so much weird stuff that just keeps on happening. Like, and I kept questioning during this movie, is it self-aware? Like, because there was moments where it seemed like it was so close because, okay, Jennifer Lopez shows up and Ben Affleck is playing like just a New York jabroni in LA. That confused me at the beginning too, because they're all wearing leather jackets. There's a bunch of New York accents. And then there's the beach over there. It's like, okay, but
very strange. J-Lo shows up. Yeah, she shows up, then promptly leaves, right? And then some detective played by Christopher Walken.
No, she was there for that. She was reading a book and looking scared on the couch.
That's right. And Christopher Walken comes in and is essentially just like grilling Ben Affleck about
this.
Yeah. And
first of all, one of my notes was definitely, and we'll get to the other amazing cameo in this movie in a second, but this one, there are two people in this movie that do cameos and they take the scene. Like as soon as they're on there, they're legit. they carry it.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, and he does, and then he leaves, and he's never seen again. Never seen again.
Not even referenced ever again.
No. It's like he just showed up to, like, I don't even know, to make there be a stake, not to raise the stakes, but to put a stake in and then walk away.
Yeah, to be like, there are things happening. You guys don't know, really.
Listen,
but
I'm a detective, so like the fact that I'm here kind of is not a good thing for you guys. So I'm going to leave and never come back, and I'm just going to kind of loom.
Also, that's one of the things about the writing in this that I was just like, what is happening? They never do anything.
Nothing.
They just like, there's things happening. They keep getting like, hey, go to here, go to this place. And they're like, oh, I guess we have to go to that place. And then they go there and something happens. They're like, well, that was weird. And then they just go on with their life.
Yeah.
It's a very, very strange movie.
Very strange.
But the other thing, and I'll say this, have you as you watch movies from the early 2000s, there is a lot of kind of, by today's standards, I'll grant you, it was very common then. Not that it's like, okay, but it was much more common. Like the homophobia was like pretty, it like became a punchline around that time pretty heavily.
Oh yeah.
And so this movie has figured out a way to take that even worse, where it wasn't a punchline. It was just the weirdest, literally the like arc of these characters was based on their sexuality.
Yeah. And I mean, Josh Fadem really, I mean, they all skewer the hell out of this thing.
Gets roasted.
But oh my God. So Jennifer Lopez turns out happens to be a lesbian. And does that stop Ben Affleck from trying to get with Jennifer Lopez? No, of course not.
The opposite, actually.
Yeah.
Welcome to the drama of this movie.
But also, J-Lo, and again, this movie was written by a man.
Very obviously. If you're about to talk about the monologue, very obviously.
She speaks about her women parts in a like
soliloquy.
Way too long of a
really
monologue.
long monologue while doing yoga in very small pants.
And like, why would you be telling this to a straight man who's like, hey, you're hot. Let's
No, the problem is he tried to convince her why she needed his parts. And she's like, no. I have a monologue for you. This is not, I don't need your parts. You need my parts. And the whole thing is so weird.
Oh, it's so cringy.
I literally wrote, I think around this scene, because, okay, one of the things that I thought was self-aware is at one point, Ben Affleck, it was before he knew she was a lesbian. And he like went in the bathroom. He was like flexing, like looking at himself, amping himself up. He walks out with like this burgundy silky robe and he takes it off and he literally like looks at her and starts like flexing, just kind of like looking down at her on the bed. And I was like, they know that this is dumb, right? Like they get it,
dumb.
But I don't know, but it's switched off and on all the time. Because then, the rest of the movie, and I have this as a note, is he trying to talk her out of being gay? And yes, very actively the whole time. I don't know
but that Kevin Smith movie that he's the star of, that I remember the name of it,
Dogma?
But he does the same thing. No, it's literally about him falling in love with a lesbian. And I don't even know. Every time I read the bio of the movie, I'm like, this sounds so dumb.
But
so I'm like, he probably had success with that movie and was like,
you know what? This guy can nail this role.
Trope and plop that in there.
And there was a little bit of reversal, to be fair. At one point, she did try to convince him that he was in fact gay as well. So there was,
to which he did not respond well.
No, he did not.
As you might imagine.
He responded very hostily. But one of my favorite things about this movie was clearly that there was a ton of monologues that made no sense. Like there was nothing there, but they were long presentations, I guess.
It's almost like they wanted it to be an art movie somehow. And then it's like,
but didn't fully commit.
No. And then had cameos and shit. You don't have an art movie where you have cameos.
That's not,
like, just not how popular. You do that. Yeah.
Okay, because let's get the cameo number 2.
Yes.
Al Pacino shows up in this movie for 5 minutes. And first of all, once again, another fantastic actor. Carries the scene.
Has a whole screaming fit.
Yeah. The real moment of Pacino is happening here.
Yeah, it's very Pacino.
Once again, he is there. and then he is gone forever.
And he does the same thing. He raises a stake and then is gone.
No, kind of. He was like, I kind of want to kill you both right now.
Oh, that's
and then
right.
Jennifer Lopez is like, but that would be dumb. He's like, you're right. The end. He left. That's it. It's like the whole time this movie is just insane. Maybe my favorite part is they're talking at one point about like, we should just get away from all this. Try and be good people. He's like, where would you go? And she's like, I think maybe Oregon. And it's like, I have never heard one person say the state's name that way. Like, if there's one thing to take me out of this movie, one thing that's not serious, it's her saying that word wrong.
What's wrong with Oregon? I like Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. It's like, that's a state. Have you heard of it?
See, we kind of skirted over my favorite part. I honestly don't even remember where it's buried in this timeline. But the part where J-Lo's girlfriend comes in.
I will say that was the biggest shock moment in that movie for me.
Insane. She
once again another person that Ben Affleck just lets in.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, yeah, okay, come on in.
She comes in and is flipping out and then cuts her wrists.
Literally tries to commit suicide in front of everyone in the kitchen.
Insane. And then it's like, and then that gets taken care of and it's like, J-Lo, like Ben Affleck turns to J-Lo and is like, J-Lo, what? And she's like, yeah, that's her. And it's like, oh my God, dude, what? So it's like they doubled down on their problematic stuff. It's like,
and okay,
whoa.
Because here's the thing. That conversation didn't pass the Bechdel test.
Right.
They're talking about him. Even though it's not like normal. It's not a normal situation because Jennifer Lopez ex-girlfriend, actually, did they break up in that conversation? I think they broke up in that.
She wanted to break up with, like, J-Lo wanted to break up with her.
And if you're confused, so were we.
Yeah.
You can be confused too by watching Gigli. Because there's just things happening all the time that don't really make sense. They don't tie together. I don't know.
It was like their grounding force, whoever made it and whoever wrote it, the grounding force was like, Gigli kidnaps a kid and watches him. It was like that was the grounding that they used for the whole thing. And it's like, that is such a weird thing to come back to.
I also feel like it's kind of glossed over. And we talked about this the other day. It was a lot more common to do movies where you would portray people that were developmentally challenged.
Yeah.
Before now. Like it feels different now. And I don't know.
And it's like, you watch I Am Sam and Forrest Gump, and it's like they're done in a way where it's not like, but this one in particular is done as such a caricature of that it's like, oh my.
There's some element
God.
of when I was listening to the lines that this guy had playing this character, I was like, you wrote these lines, man. You wrote lines for this. You chose this. You did this on purpose, and it's terrible. So to not gloss over that is also terrible and a main part of the movie. It's the whole time.
Yeah, literally the driving force, which it sounds like we're talking about like 8 different movies.
But we're not. It's one terrible movie.
I always whenever there's a movie on and some weird thing like that happens that an actor does, I'll like tap Carlin on the shoulder and I'll be like, that was an actor's choice. That was actor's choice.
Somebody did that.
Yeah. Al Pacino, full of actor's choices.
Oh, yeah.
If you ever watch him in any role and he does something really weird, he did that. Like nobody told him to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in this movie as well.
Yes. Like, I don't know. But first of all, I feel like it's also worth saying I was confused and my brain had to work the whole time. I did not hate watching this movie. Like there was problems with it, but it was like I was watching like the weirdest moment in history. Like it's like this could be an example of what not to do in screenwriting. You know what I mean? It's such a shining example of going the wrong direction every time.
Yeah.
That it becomes interesting.
It's not even like it's just, oh my God, it really is enigmatic. And at every point you're wondering like every bit of detail around the moment that's happening. I'm like watching it going like, who, okay. Like at any point, nobody said like,
weirdest.
hey, isn't this dumb? Or like,
this seems kind of dumb, guys.
Yeah, why would they go and eat at a fast food place, all three of them? And then she tries to convince him that he's gay at that fast food. Like, what a strange, just every scene. It's like they needed a producer.
They needed somebody else to be like, no, that's terrible.
Yeah.
They needed one person in the room to be like, that's terrible.
Great example of yes men.
Yeah. So it ends up being a very, very strange movie overall.
So strange. Very worthwhile. Like, very fun to watch.
Yes.
Because it is. It is just an insane roller coaster at every point. And on the podcast, they really... one of the reasons why I think the structure that they have now is so not apparent in this one is because, like, how do you structure this?
There's no structure to the movie.
Josh Fadem early on is like, so do we do like a plot synopsis or something? Because I'm chomping at the bit to talk about the vagina monologue.
Basically.
You know, and it's like I really have to. It's at no point is there like a foothold for you to climb up.
I'll say this, that that entire monologue was set up to be like, okay, she's gonna seduce him with her, because they really tried to hammer home she was smart. She's like, look, she has a book.
Yeah.
And he like says like, oh, you're smart, you got books. And like, that's it. Like, literally, that's almost, okay, it's a little paraphrase, but it's basically a line in the movie. And so she has this entire thing where she extrapolates on why. And I know that it was supposed to be like a sexy thing. And yeah, she's wearing very little clothes doing yoga, but it did not have that effect on me. I was kind of just like, what are you saying?
It was like the visuals were like, okay, this is, I mean, it's J-Lo doing yoga and
like spandex
not a lot of
shorts.
clothes. Yeah. But then the words that she was saying were just like, she read an SAT book and was like, loquacious, you know? And it's like, what are you?
And then Ben Affleck's just standing there with a full on like shit eating grin, just like looking at her. It's like, yeah, this is good.
So crazy. I just love this episode. And I will say, I did say that it wasn't like indicative of the rest of the show. Again, I think it's the movie one.
Yes.
Early on in the podcast history. And they've since sort of structured in a way where Caitlin does a plot synopsis of every movie and just plows through it. Jamie kind of does a little, yeah. And then so basically she reads that, and then it's like that's the halfway point, and then they go into like the representation and stuff.
Oh, okay.
And they have a nipple score.
Yes, they had that in this one, so they started early. It did not get a lot of nipples.
No, I love the nipple score. I don't think they actually have like a. It's not like 10 out of 10 nipples.
No,
I think
they said it's between 0 and 5.
Yeah. Well, and at this point, it's like on Cinema at the Cinema. It's like 18,000 bags of popcorn for this one. Yeah. They'll throw nipples around. And I like my favorite is when they do half nipples because just the image is really funny. It's like a nipple, and then like half of one. It's really fun. Jamie Loftus is she's written for a bunch of stuff. She actually has these great expose podcasts. We talked about it a little bit, but she infiltrated Mensa.
Yes.
And then just trolled Mensa. Like she didn't infiltrate. She got into Mensa.
Yeah, got in.
Which
I think that's maybe the greatest troll of all. Is that she did get in.
Her amazing, just like she hates it. It's so dumb. It's such a dumb thing. And she wanted to expose how stupid this thing is, this IQ dumbness.
Yeah.
But she has a bunch of exposés like that. And Caitlin, I met Caitlin. She was the Nerd Melt showroom down at Meltdown Comics in Los Angeles. She was the theater manager. So she hired me to intern there. And I later learned she's got a master's in screenwriting. She mentions that's one of the tropes, not tropes. The funny thing that happens in every episode is it's like a bit. It's like it's her way of kind of like pushing aside any other opinions. It's really funny when she does it. She's like, "Well, I did not like Gigli, and I happen to have a master's in screenwriting." You know, it's really she's so funny. I've seen her do stand up a bunch of times. She doesn't do it as much anymore, but She's so funny. And just together, they're just such a duo. Jamie has all these amazing live shows too. If everybody should look at those. They're very meta and very weird. But I just wanted to throw in that they're pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And have great chemistry.
Yeah, no, it really is a fantastic show. I'd never heard of this. I'd heard of the Bechdel test.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as you hear of the Bechdel test, you'll start to see movies failing because it's a lot. It's
Yes.
a lot of movies fail the Bechdel test. And so you essentially have a show that makes all of that funny, where they break down a lot of times terrible movies, sometimes good movies.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's great movies because I was thinking I think they mentioned Mad Max on there, and I bet that failed the Bechdel test because there's not a lot of women in the movie. So there wasn't any conversation between.
And I don't think anybody's named in those movies. Well,
she is. Charlize Theron is.
Oh, that's right.
Furiosa or whatever. I can't remember what they call her name. But she was just with Mad Max, and they're like in a desert. You know, so there's a lot of these that fail, and it really just kind of it's something that you'll see, and some of them it makes sense. And I actually found an article.
Oh my god,
that talks about some very large movies that have failed the Bechdel test. Number 1, Gravity, which I don't know that they could have done much about it. It's just it's 2 people.
Any one-act movie with one character doesn't pass.
No,
Sorry,
it
folks.
failed. Sorry, everybody. Downsizing. I don't think I even saw that.
Downsizing didn't pass. Really?
Yeah, that's what
that was
saying.
A good one with Matt Damon.
Oh,
no,
there is. Yeah, it is one with Matt Damon.
Oh.
So they talk to each other, but the people who are talking aren't named.
See, there you go.
The Avengers, to the shock of virtually no one. Jackie Brown,
which is pretty crazy.
Yeah,
when you think about it,
because when you think about how strong the protagonist is,
right?
Pam Grier is amazing in Jackie Brown.
Tomb Raider doesn't pass.
Yeah, no, Tomb Raider is,
which is literally.
It's like how would they not have one conversation in the movie? Is that?
And they just might talk about a guy. It's crazy that it's some of them are just out of left field. And it really makes you realize, this podcast really helps you realize like how little representation women still get in film, which is crazy. Because you think about like Asian representation, and Crazy Rich Asians comes out and it's like, this is an all Asian cast and it's like super great for representation. And like how little Asian representation is in films
for one movie to come out and blow it all up.
And then yet still like not even women are getting represented. And then for these, it's just like, man, it must be really tough.
No, and that's the cool thing about the Bechdel test in general. And the podcast is doing a similar thing.
Yeah.
It makes you think about it because in the end, it's just not giving those characters room to actually be a character.
Right.
You know, it's bad character writing is what it is. You know, if all they're there to be is a plot device for the romantic interest for like a man, that's a bad character.
That's a bad character.
It's a bad character. It's not good. It's not good.
And I will also say, if this sounds like, oh, this is cumbersome or whatever, they caveat everything because they still like Gigli. Like,
no,
not Gigli.
Okay. No, some did. Some did kind of the same way we did, where you're watching something so bad it's funny.
Yeah.
But there was one who hated it.
Caitlin hated it.
It was Caitlin.
Yes. Yeah.
She didn't even want to talk about it. Like, she's like, no, I'm mad that I'm going to have to talk about this stupid movie. It like we were laughing about it because it is kind of funny at how bad it is, but it is like,
oh, it's very bad.
Offensive.
It's straight offensive.
On the things they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's offensive that they thought this was a good idea.
But like some of these movies that don't pass Bechdel tests are still like, they still like the movies. Yeah, no, like Lord of the Rings, like you mentioned. It's like, that's a good movie.
Yeah. No,
if only they could have had more women representation.
Yeah.
And it could have passed the Bechdel test.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what it makes me think of is it's like, well, if that's a good movie, it is. Raging Bull's a good movie, you know, like whatever. They could have had 2 women in the movie named characters
that talk to each other
about something.
About
like
anything. Literally anything.
Passed,
yeah.
You know, and it's like, it makes you realize that the bare minimum is like such a
still too
low
much
bar, and they still can't jump over it.
Yeah,
and that's what I enjoy about it. And obviously they're very funny.
Yeah, it's really funny. Don't let any of that dissuade you, trying to like learn about like representation. It's funny the whole time too. You're just going to enjoy it. Like you're just going to enjoy it. It's all good.
What's another movie on there that hasn't passed?
Empire Strikes Back. But that's because there's only Leia basically in the entire universe.
That's so interesting.
500 Days of Summer. That's one that you wouldn't necessarily guess.
Yeah.
But I think I bet the one that it gets most people on is two named characters having a conversation that's not romantically.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the kicker that is going to get most movies.
So it's so interesting. It's so interesting. I love it. I've listened to this podcast quite a bit. Really enjoy it.
Yeah. No, it was a fantastic show and I will definitely listen again. So I have a recommendation for next week, and this is an indie podcast that I actually saw recommended from someone else in our network. Paul from Varmints told me about a show called Assorted Goods, where each week they try and break down like a specific topic and just learn about it. And their most recent episode they put out is called Overrated. And it's about how everything that we consume or buy or go to has a rating system. And how do those rating systems play into how we perceive things, how well things do, or just the whole world around everything having a rating?
Stuff's so interesting. I'll tell you, I did listen to an NPR story. It sounds like these guys probably heard the same thing.
Maybe.
And wanted to do an even deeper dive. But it was this author who has self-published on Amazon. And on Amazon, people can rate it. And then you can click on their profile and see what else they've rated. And he would, anytime someone rated his thing badly, click on their profile and see what they rated well. And he would feel better about himself. It's like they rated the McDonald's fry maker 5 stars, makes fries great, like whatever. But it was Ira Glass, I think, that was doing it. And he was like, well, have you ever done the opposite? Like, no, don't tell me what people who like my book also rated.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, like, well, I did. And this person who rated your thing 5 stars said this is a wonderful portrayal of Meryl Streep and her history or whatever. He wrote a book about Meryl Streep. We clicked on her profile and 5 stars, McDonald's fry maker. It's like,
yeah.
And it was like, oh, wow, okay. It's like, it's arbitrary, isn't it? And it's like,
yes,
yep,
it is. So yeah, we'll dig into that more next week. And remember,
there's always more to discover.
Nailed it.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Discovery Show. We would love for you to get in touch. We have a Facebook group called the Podcast Discovery Club, and our Twitter is @thepdsofficial. We also record the show live every Friday night at 8 o'clock on Twitch. We would love for you to be part of the show while we're recording it.
If you want to support the show, we have a number of ways you can do that. From our Patreon to our affiliate links, they're always linked in the show notes. In the end, you support the show just by listening, and it means the world to us. So thank you so much for being a part of our journey.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network.